The stars burned in the black void of space as another world died. Captain Jake Morrison watched from the bridge of his ship Mercury as the planet Kelron turned red with fire. The Vorthak had come again. Their dark ships moved like hungry insects across the planet's surface. Each ship was alive in ways that made Jake's skin crawl. Metal and flesh twisted together in shapes that hurt to look at. These were not machines. They were monsters. Jake turned away from the viewing screen. His crew worked quietly at their stations. Everyone knew what they were seeing. Another civilization was ending. The Kelrons had been peaceful traders. They made beautiful art from crystal and light. Now their cities were ash. Their people were gone. The Vorthak took everything. They left nothing behind. The communication system crackled to life. A blue face appeared on the screen. The Alterian looked terrified. Her large eyes were wide with fear. Blue tears ran down her cheeks. Jake had never seen an Alterian cry before. They were healers. They saved lives across the galaxy. Now they needed saving themselves. "Please help us," the Alterian said. Her voice shook. "The Vorthak are coming to our world. Our defenses cannot stop them. We have children here. Millions of children." Jake felt his heart pound. He looked at his crew. They all stared at the screen. The Alterian woman's fear was real. Her planet would burn like all the others, unless someone helped. "We are not soldiers," Jake said. "We explore space. We study planets. We are not fighters." "You are all we have left," the Alterian said. "The Galactic Council cannot help. Their fleets are scattered. Please. Our children will die." The screen went dark. Jake stood in silence. His ship was small. His crew numbered only 50 people. What could they do against the Vorthak Empire? These monsters had destroyed 300 worlds. They had beaten the greatest armies in the galaxy. They adapted to every weapon. They learned from every battle. They were perfect killers. Communications Officer Danny Walsh spoke up. "Captain, we have a message from Admiral Lisa Carter on Earth." Jake nodded. The Admiral's face appeared on screen. She looked tired. Dark circles ringed her eyes. The war was wearing everyone down. "Jake, I know what you are thinking," Admiral Carter said. "Earth Command says we should not get involved. We should protect our own worlds. But I have been watching. The reports. The Vorthak are moving toward human space. They will reach us eventually." Jake felt cold. He had hoped Earth was far enough away. He had hoped humanity could stay hidden while the galaxy burned. But the Admiral was right. The Vorthak would find them. They always found everyone. "What are your orders, Admiral?" Jake asked. "I am sending you help," Admiral Carter said. 5 ships are coming your way. Captain Julie Brooks commands them. She has Marines on board. If you want to help the Alterians, now is your chance." The screen went dark again. Jake looked around his bridge. His crew waited for his decision. They trusted him. They would follow his orders even if those orders led to death. Jake thought about the crying Alterian woman. He thought about the children on her world. "Set course for Alterian space," Jake said. "Best speed." His crew moved quickly. The Mercury turned toward the Alterian system. Jake hoped they were not flying toward their deaths, but someone had to try. Someone had to fight back. 3 days later, Jake watched 5 human warships join his small fleet. Captain Julie Brooks contacted him from her ship Defiance. She was younger than Jake expected. Her face was hard, but her eyes were kind. "Captain Morrison, we are ready to fight," she said. "My Marines are the best Earth has. We will not let the Alterians down." Jake felt better with the warships beside him, but he still worried. The Vorthak had never lost a battle. Their bioships could change and adapt. They learned from every attack. How could 6 human ships make a difference? The answer came when they reached Alterian space. Jake stared at his screen in horror. Vorthak bioships surrounded the blue planet. There were hundreds of them. Each ship pulsed with dark life. Tentacles of metal and flesh reached out from their hulls. These tentacles could grab other ships. They could tear through armor like paper. The planet's orbital stations were already destroyed. Burning metal drifted in space. Some pieces were still recognizable. A communication array. Part of a defense platform. The Alterians had tried to fight. They had failed. All ships, this is Captain Brooks. The radio crackled. We are outnumbered 100 to 1. The smart thing would be to run. But smart does not save children. All ships attack. Show them what humans can do. The 6 human ships charged toward the Vorthak fleet. Jake felt his stomach twist with fear. This was suicide. But he thought about the Alterian woman. He thought about her tears. Someone had to try. The first Vorthak bioship they met was massive. It looked like a giant spider made of black metal. Red lights pulsed along its surface. When Captain Brooks fired missiles at it, the bioship changed. New armor grew across its hull. The missiles exploded harmlessly. It adapted, Jake said. Just like the report said, it learned to stop our weapons, but humans were stubborn. They did not give up easily. Brooks fired again with different weapons. The bioship adapted again. Then Lieutenant Ben Hayes did something unexpected. His fighter was damaged. Instead of retreating, he flew straight at the bioship. His ship exploded against its hull. The bioship shuddered. It had not expected that. It could adapt to weapons. It could not adapt to pilots who chose to die rather than retreat. For the first time in the war, a Vorthak bioship looked confused. Jake smiled grimly. Maybe humans could not match Vorthak technology. Maybe their ships were smaller and weaker. But humans had something the Vorthak did not understand. They had the will to keep fighting even when fighting meant death. They had hope even when hope seemed foolish. The battle for Alteria had begun. Jake did not know if they could win, but he knew they would not give up. That had to count for something. In a galaxy full of logical minds and careful strategies, maybe stubborn human hope was exactly what the universe needed. The space around Alteria burned with weapons fire and exploding ships. Commander Danny Walsh pushed his fighter through a cloud of debris that had once been an Alterian defense satellite. His hands gripped the controls tightly as he dove toward a Vorthak bioship. The thing looked like a twisted cross between a shark and a spider. Its hull pulsed with veins of red light. Danny fired his plasma cannons. The bright bolts struck the bioship's armor and exploded in flowers of blue fire. For a moment, Danny felt hope. Then he watched in horror as the creature's hull began to change. New plates of armor grew where his shots had hit. Thick ridges formed along its surface. When Danny fired again, his plasma bolts bounced off harmlessly. It learned, Danny said into his radio. The thing actually learned how to stop my weapons. Captain, Jake Morrison's voice crackled back. All fighters pull back, let the big ships try. Danny retreated as Captain Julie Brooks brought her warship Defiance into firing range. The ship's main guns opened up with everything they had. Missile after missile slammed into the bioship. For a few seconds, the creature writhed in pain. Then it began to change again. Its entire hull shifted and flowed like liquid metal. New defensive structures sprouted from its surface. Within minutes, it was immune to the Defiance's weapons, too. Dr. Amy Rodriguez watched the battle from the Mercury's science station. Her fingers flew over her instruments as she scanned the enemy ships. What she found made her blood run cold. These creatures were not just adapting their armor. They were learning everything about human technology. Every weapon they faced made them smarter. Every tactic they encountered made them stronger. Captain Morrison, Amy said, I am reading massive data transfers between the enemy ships. They are sharing information. Each ship that learns something new teaches all the others. They have a collective mind. Jake felt sick. The reports from other battles had mentioned this. The Vorthak did not just conquer worlds. They absorbed them. Every species they defeated became part of their collective knowledge. 300 civilizations had fallen to them. That meant 300 different ways of thinking and fighting were now part of their shared consciousness. The battle was going badly. Human ships darted between the massive bioships like small fish avoiding sharks. The Vorthak had adapted to every weapon the humans carried. Their return fire was devastating. The escort ship Guardian exploded in a ball of flame. Captain Brooks barely escaped as her own ship took heavy damage. That was when Lieutenant Ben Hayes made his choice. His fighter had been hit by Vorthak weapons. His engines were failing. His weapons were offline. By every rule of war, he should retreat. Instead, he turned toward the largest bioship and pushed his engines to maximum. "Hayes, what are you doing?" Danny called over the radio. "Something they will not expect," Ben said. His voice was calm. He sounded almost happy. "They can adapt to our weapons. Let them adapt to this." Ben's fighter struck the bioship at full speed. The explosion tore a hole in the creature's hull. Ben was gone instantly, but his sacrifice did something the Vorthak had never experienced. Instead of giving up when his weapons failed, a human had chosen to become a weapon himself. The bioship thrashed in space. Its collective mind struggled to understand what had happened. How could it adapt to an attack that destroyed the attacker? How could it defend against an enemy who chose death over defeat? For the first time in 300 conquests, a Vorthak bioship experienced confusion. Jake saw his chance. "All ships ramming speed, follow Hayes in." The surviving human ships charged. The Vorthak bioships tried to adapt, but they could not predict pure desperation. Another human fighter smashed into a bioship's engine section. The escort ship Ranger rammed a creature that looked like a metal octopus. Both ships exploded, but the bioship died with them. The Vorthak fleet began to retreat. Not because they were losing ships. They had lost ships before. They retreated because they could not understand their enemy. Every species they had fought before valued survival. Every army they had faced used logic and strategy. Humans seemed to fight with emotion and madness. As the enemy ships pulled back, Jake ordered his fleet to retreat as well. They had saved Alteria for now. But the cost had been high. 2 ships were gone. Dozens of good people were dead, including Ben Hayes, who had shown the galaxy something new. He had shown them that humans would rather die than surrender. Dr. Amy Rodriguez worked through the night analyzing data from the battle. What she found changed everything. The Vorthak collective mind was built for logical conquest. It could adapt to any technology. It could counter any strategy. But it had one weakness that no one had discovered before. It could not process pure chaos. Every species the Vorthak had conquered fought to survive. They used careful tactics and rational strategies. When they lost, they surrendered to save lives. This made sense to the Vorthak mind. It was logical, it was predictable. It was something they could understand and counter. But humans fought differently. They made choices that seemed insane. They sacrificed themselves for others. They attacked when they should retreat. They kept fighting when victory was impossible. This did not make sense to the Vorthak collective. It created errors in their shared consciousness. Amy brought her findings to Captain Morrison. Jake listened carefully as she explained what she had learned. The Vorthak were not invincible. They could be beaten, but not with better weapons or smarter tactics. They could only be beaten by opponents who refused to be logical. "You are saying our weakness is our strength," Jake said. "Yes," Amy replied. "Every other species in the galaxy thinks like them. They fight to win or they surrender to survive. We fight because we choose to fight. That choice confuses them. It creates flaws in their collective mind." Jake thought about Ben Hayes. The young pilot had not planned to defeat the Vorthak collective. He had simply refused to give up. Maybe that was enough. Maybe one stubborn human choice was worth more than all the advanced weapons in the galaxy. The Mercury and its surviving escort ships limped away from Alteria. They had learned something important. The Vorthak could be hurt, not by matching their technology, but by being completely unpredictable. Now they had to get this information to Admiral Carter and the rest of the human fleet. The war was far from over. The Vorthak would be back with more ships and new adaptations. But for the first time since the monsters had begun their conquest, someone had found a way to make them bleed. It was not much, but it was a beginning. The Great Council Chamber on Nexus Prime held representatives from 12 different species. Ambassador Kate Sullivan sat at the circular table feeling very small. The other delegates towered over her, or floated in specialized atmosphere suits. Some had scales, others had tentacles. A few were made of living crystal. All of them stared at the lone human with what Kate could only describe as pity. The Ilarian delegate spoke first. Zenthara was a being of pure crystal whose voice sounded like wind chimes. The humans should evacuate their worlds immediately. The Vorthak will reach your space within months. You cannot hope to resist them. Kate stood up slowly. She was shorter than everyone else in the room, but her voice was strong. We do not run from fights. That is not who we are. A rumble of disapproval went around the table. The Dreknari delegate hissed through his scaled lips. Your pride will get your entire species killed. The Vorthak have destroyed armies 1,000 times larger than yours. Maybe, Kate said. But we hurt them at Alteria. For the first time in this war, they retreated. The crystalline being Zenthara made a sound like breaking glass. Kate realized it was laughter. They retreated because they had accomplished their goal. The Alterians were saved only because the Vorthak chose to leave. Do not mistake their mercy for victory. Kate felt anger rise in her chest. These beings had fought the Vorthak for decades. They had lost every battle. Their people died. While they sat in comfortable chairs and debated strategy, someone had to speak for the dead. Captain Morrison's report says otherwise, Kate said. The Vorthak bioship showed confusion. They could not adapt to human tactics. They could not predict human behavior. The Alterian representative spoke. Up. Her name was Veltar, and her blue skin still showed scars from the recent battle. The humans saved our world. Their fighters died for our children. I have never seen such courage. The other delegates shifted uncomfortably. Courage was not something they discussed much in council meetings. Military strategy and tactical analysis were safer topics. Emotions led to poor decisions. Captain Jake Morrison entered the chamber carrying a data pad. He looked tired but determined. Kate had asked him to present his findings to the council. Maybe hard facts would convince them where emotions had failed. Honorable delegates, Jake began. We discovered something important at Alteria. The Vorthak collective consciousness has a weakness. It cannot process irrational behavior. He activated a holographic display showing the battle. The delegates watched as human fighters performed maneuvers that made no tactical sense. Ships attacked when they should have retreated. Pilots chose death over surrender. The Vorthak bioships responded with visible confusion. Every species they have conquered fights logically, Jake continued. They adapt to logical strategies. They counter rational tactics. But humans do not always fight rationally. We fight with emotion. We make choices that seem crazy. This creates errors in their collective mind. The Dreknari delegate leaned forward. His yellow eyes glowed with interest. You are suggesting we abandon military doctrine. You want us to fight without strategy or planning. Not exactly, Jake said. We need strategy, but we need unpredictable strategy. We need tactics that make no sense. We need to be so chaotic that their collective mind cannot process our actions. Colonel Ryan Murphy joined the presentation. He was a tactical specialist who had studied every Vorthak battle on record. His analysis was disturbing. The enemy learns from every encounter. They adapt to every weapon system. They counter every known military formation, but they have never faced an enemy that deliberately fights badly. Kate watched the delegates absorb this information. She could see them struggling with the concept. Their entire military culture was built on logic and efficiency. The idea of fighting poorly on purpose was alien to them. This is madness, the Ilarian delegate said. You propose to defeat superior technology with inferior tactics. We propose to defeat predictable technology with unpredictable tactics, Ryan replied. The Vorthak collective mind is their greatest strength, but it is also their greatest weakness. They think as one. When that one mind becomes confused, their entire fleet becomes vulnerable. Dr. Amy Rodriguez presented her scientific findings. She had analyzed the data from every sensor during the Alteria battle. Her conclusions were clear. The Vorthak bioships had suffered system failures when faced with human unpredictability. Their adaptive algorithms had crashed trying to counter irrational behavior. The key is emotional decision-making, Amy explained. Every other species fights to achieve objectives. Humans sometimes fight just because they choose to fight. That choice creates chaos in their collective consciousness. The council chamber fell silent. Kate could see the delegates thinking. They were logical beings trying to understand an illogical concept. Some of them looked confused. Others looked frightened. A few looked intrigued. Finally, the Alterian delegate Veltar spoke. "My people owe the humans a debt. They died for our children without being asked. If they believe they can hurt the Vorthak, we will support them." One by one, other delegates began to agree, not because they believed the human plan would work, but because nothing else had worked. They were desperate enough to try anything. The Galactic Council voted to authorize a joint strike force. Humans would provide the tactical leadership. Other species would provide ships and support. The target would be the Vorthak shipyard world of Morden. If they could damage the enemy's construction facilities, it might slow their advance. Kate felt a mixture of pride and terror. Humanity had been given a chance to prove themselves. They would lead the greatest military force the galaxy had ever assembled. But if they failed, entire civilizations would die. The pressure was enormous. As the council session ended, Jake approached Kate. "Do you think we can actually do this?" he asked. Kate looked around the chamber at the alien delegates. They were placing their hopes in a species they barely knew. They were trusting their lives to human unpredictability. It was a huge gamble. "I do not know if we can win," Kate said. "But I know we will try. That has to count for something." Jake nodded. In a few weeks they would face the Vorthak fleet in open battle. They would test their theory that chaos could defeat order. They would learn if human stubbornness was stronger than alien perfection. The council chamber emptied as delegates returned to their ships. Soon word would spread across the galaxy. Humanity was going to war against the unconquerable enemy. Some would call it brave. Others would call it suicide. Kate suspected it might be both. But as she watched the stars through the chamber's great windows, she felt something the galaxy had not felt in years. She felt hope. Maybe it was foolish hope. Maybe it would lead to disaster. But it was better than the despair that had gripped the galaxy for so long. The humans were going to fight. They were going to lose ships and people. But they were not going to surrender. In a universe full of logical minds, that stubborn refusal might be exactly what everyone needed. The combined fleet hung in space at the edge of Vorthak territory like a storm waiting to break. Captain Julie Brooks stood on the bridge of her battleship Defiance and counted the ships around her. 300 vessels from 12 different species, the largest military force ever assembled in galactic history, all of them following human tactical leadership. The irony was not lost on her. 6 months ago, humanity had been unknown to most of the galaxy. Now they were commanding fleets that included ships older than human civilization. The crystalline Ilarian vessels looked like floating cathedrals. The organic Alterian bioships pulsed with gentle blue light. The massive Draknari battleships bristled with enough weapons to level continents. All of them were about to follow her into what every tactical manual would call suicide. "Captain, we are receiving deployment orders from the other fleet commanders," her communications officer reported. Julie looked at the tactical display. The alien commanders wanted to arrange their ships in classic battle formations, overlapping fields of fire, coordinated attack patterns, defensive screens protecting larger vessels, everything logical and predictable. "Ignore those orders," Julie said. "Signal all ships to assume chaos protocol formation." Her crew exchanged worried glances. Chaos protocol was the opposite of everything they had learned in military academy. Instead of organized formations, ships would scatter randomly. Instead of coordinated attacks, each vessel would operate independently. Instead of following orders, captains would make their own decisions based on instinct and emotion. Commander Danny Walsh had been promoted after his performance at Alteria. Now he commanded a squadron of fighters that were supposed to support the main attack. According to Chaos Protocol, he would ignore the main attack entirely and do whatever felt right in the moment. "All fighters, this is Danny," he said over the radio. "Remember what we learned. The enemy expects us to be smart. Today we are going to be stupid. Follow your gut. Trust your feelings. If something seems like a bad idea, do it anyway." The alien. Ship captains were clearly confused by the human tactics. Several of them requested clarification of orders. Julie responded by telling them there were no orders. Each captain should attack whatever target looked interesting. The goal was not victory. The goal was chaos. Dr. Amy Rodriguez monitored enemy communications from the science station. The Vorthak were aware of the approaching fleet. Their bioships were forming defensive patterns around the shipyard world of Morden. She counted over 500 enemy vessels. They outnumbered the galactic fleet by almost 2-1, but numbers might not matter if the human theory was correct. The Vorthak's strength came from their collective consciousness. Their bioships worked together with perfect coordination. If that coordination could be disrupted, their numerical advantage would become meaningless. "Begin the attack," Julie ordered. The alien ships moved forward in careful formations. Their commanders were trying to follow human tactical doctrine while still maintaining some semblance of military order. The Vorthak bioships responded exactly as expected. They began adapting their defenses to counter the incoming weapons. 4. The first few minutes the battle went exactly like every previous engagement with the Vorthak. The enemy learned. They adapted. They began winning. Several Ilarian ships were destroyed by bioship weapons that had evolved specifically to penetrate crystalline armor. Then the humans arrived. Danny's fighter squadron came screaming in from an impossible angle. Instead of attacking the enemy ships, they flew straight through the Vorthak formation without firing a shot. The bioships tried to target them, but the fighters were moving too fast and in too many different directions. "What are they doing?" the Altarian fleet commander asked over the radio. "I have no idea," Julie replied. "That is the point." Danny led his fighters in a wide loop and then attacked the bioships from behind. But instead of using their weapons, the fighters began ramming the enemy vessels. One after another, human pilots chose to destroy themselves rather than retreat. The Vorthak collective mind had never encountered this behavior before. The bioships began to malfunction. Their adaptive systems could not process attacks that destroyed the attacker. How could they defend against enemies who considered death an acceptable outcome? Their collective consciousness started generating contradictory instructions. Julie saw her opportunity. All human ships full attack. Make it as crazy as possible. The human vessels charged into the Vorthak formation with no plan and no coordination. Captain Tom Baker dove his cruiser Nashville straight down through the middle of 3 bioships. Instead of trying to destroy them, he used his ship's engines to create a massive electromagnetic pulse that disabled their sensors. Sergeant Tony Kim was leading a marine assault on a Vorthak command ship. Instead of trying to capture it, his troops were painting graffiti on the walls and playing loud music through the ship's communication system. The bioship's collective mind could not understand why the humans were decorating instead of fighting. The chaos spread to the alien vessels. Inspired by human example, they began abandoning their careful tactics. An Ilarian captain decided to use his ship's crystal resonance array as a weapon. A Draknari commander ordered his crew to fire their engines backwards while shooting forwards. Nothing they did made tactical sense. Everything they did confused the enemy. Dr. Amy Rodriguez watched the enemy fleet's coordination collapse in real time. The Vorthak bioships were sending contradictory signals to each other. Their collective consciousness was experiencing what could only be described as a nervous breakdown. Ships that had been perfectly coordinated were now flying into each other. "It is working," Amy reported. "Their collective mind cannot process this level of chaos. They are losing cohesion." The tide of battle turned completely when Commander Walsh did something that violated every rule of space combat. His fighter was damaged and out of ammunition. Instead of retreating, he began broadcasting his personal diary over all frequencies. The Vorthak collective heard him talking about his childhood dog and his fear of spiders. The randomness of human memory was more destructive than any weapon. One by one, the Vorthak bioships began shutting down. Their collective consciousness could not handle the overwhelming chaos of human behavior. Some ships tried to adapt to the random attacks. Others tried to retreat. A few simply stopped moving entirely as their organic components refused to process any more contradictory data. The shipyard world of Morden was defended by the largest bioships in the Vorthak fleet. These massive creatures were the size of space stations. They had never been defeated in battle. But when Captain Julie Brooks led a charge straight at them while her crew sang old Earth songs over the radio, even these giants began to falter. The battle ended not with a great explosion but with a great silence. The Vorthak fleet simply stopped fighting. Their bioships drifted in space like sleeping giants. Their collective consciousness had been overwhelmed by pure human chaos. For the first time in 300 conquests, the Vorthak had been completely defeated. Julie looked around at her surviving ships. They had lost vessels and good people. But they had proven something important. Chaos could defeat order. Emotion could overcome logic. Human unpredictability was more powerful than alien perfection. The galaxy had found its weapon against the unconquerable enemy. It was not a better gun or a faster ship. It was the simple human refusal to make sense. In a universe that valued logic above all else, human madness had become the most valuable commodity of all. The shipyards of Morden burned behind them as the fleet began its journey home. But Julie knew this was just the beginning. The Vorthak would not give up easily. They would adapt to this defeat just as they had adapted to every other challenge. The war was far from over. But for the first time since the Vorthak had begun their conquest, the galaxy had hope. The monsters could be beaten, not by matching their strength but by embracing human weakness. The predators had finally met their prey. Earth hung in space like a blue jewel surrounded by the largest fleet humanity had ever assembled. Admiral Lisa Carter stood in the command center on Luna Base watching the approach of death itself. The Vorthak were coming with everything they had. Over 1,000 bioships moved toward the solar system like a plague of mechanical locusts. At their head flew the massive flagship of Warlord Krexthor himself. The alien warlord had learned from the defeat at Morden. His collective consciousness had adapted to human chaos by becoming more focused and direct. Instead of trying to understand human behavior, the Vorthak would simply eliminate its source. They would burn Earth to ash and scatter humanity across the void. Without humans to create chaos, the galaxy would return to logical order. Captain Jake Morrison stood beside the Admiral studying the tactical displays. The human fleet was impressive by Earth standards, but tiny compared to the approaching armada. 200 ships against 1,000. The mathematics of destruction were simple and brutal. "We cannot win this fight with conventional tactics," Jake said. "Good thing we do not use conventional tactics," Lisa replied. The plan was desperate even, by human standards. Instead of defending Earth from space, they would let the Vorthak land on the planet's surface. Human volunteers would infiltrate the enemy bioships during the landing operation. Once inside, they would create as much chaos as possible while broadcasting human culture directly into the Vorthak collective consciousness. Captain Julie Brooks commanded the space defense from her rebuilt ship, Defiance. She had volunteered to lead the suicide mission into the heart of the enemy fleet. Her job was to get transport ships close enough to the Vorthak flagship for boarding parties to infiltrate the massive bioship. "All ships? This is Admiral Carter," the radio crackled. "Today we fight for our home. Today we show the galaxy what humans are made of, make them remember this day." The battle began as the Vorthak fleet entered the outer system. Human ships scattered in all directions following Chaos Protocol. Some attacked the enemy head-on. Others fled toward the asteroid belt. A few simply flew in random circles shooting at nothing. The bioships tried to adapt, but human unpredictability had grown even more refined since Morden. Commander Danny Walsh led a squadron of fighters in an attack that looked like pure suicide. They flew straight at the largest bioships while broadcasting children's nursery rhymes over all frequencies. The Vorthak collective tried to process the meaning of "Mary had a little lamb" and failed completely, but the real battle was happening on Earth's surface. As Vorthak bioships landed to begin the planetary bombardment, human transport craft snuck close to their hulls. Teams of volunteers began cutting their way inside the living ships. Each team carried portable transmitters loaded with human culture. "Sergeant," Linda Torres led the most important team. Her target was the flagship of warlord Krexthor himself. The massive bioship was the size of a small city. Its organic hull pulsed with veins of dark energy. Getting inside would be almost impossible. Getting out would be completely impossible. "Remember the mission," Linda told her team as their transport approached the flagship. "We are not here to destroy the ship. We are here to destroy their minds." The team included specialists in human culture. Dr. Peter Kim carried recordings of Earth music. Corporal Sarah Davis had databases of human literature. Private Chris Evans brought something even more powerful. He carried videos of his own daughter learning to walk. They cut through the bioship's hull using plasma torches. The interior was like a nightmare made real. Organic corridors pulsed with alien life. Mechanical components grew from walls of living tissue. The air smelled of copper and decay. But the team pushed forward toward the ship's central processing core. The Vorthak crew were not expecting intruders. The collective consciousness was focused on the battle in space. Individual, bioship defenders were programmed for external threats, not internal chaos. Linda's team moved through the ship like ghosts, avoiding contact with the enemy. They reached the central core as the space battle reached its climax. Captain Brooks had managed to ram 3 bioships with her own vessel before ejecting in an escape pod. The Defiance burned like a star as it fell toward Earth's atmosphere, but her sacrifice had created enough confusion for other teams to board their targets. Linda activated the cultural transmission array. Suddenly, the Vorthak collective consciousness was flooded with human music, poetry, art, and emotion. The bioship's organic components began to convulse as alien thoughts tried to process the chaotic beauty of human creativity. Dr. Kim played symphonies and rock music simultaneously. The combination created harmonic chaos that the collective mind could not categorize. Corporal Davis read poetry while shooting enemy defenders. The contrast between beauty and violence overloaded their logical processors. But it was Private Chris Evans who delivered the killing blow to the Vorthak collective. When enemy forces cornered the team in the processing core, he made the ultimate choice. Instead of trying to escape, he activated the ship's self-destruct sequence while broadcasting a bedtime story to his daughter back on Earth. "Once upon a time," Chris said into his transmitter as energy weapons fired around him, "there was a little girl who was braver than all the monsters in the universe." His voice carried across the Vorthak communication network. Every bioship in the fleet heard a human father telling his child that she was safe. They heard love and hope and absolute devotion. These were concepts the collective consciousness had never encountered. They were emotions that made no logical sense. The effect was catastrophic. The Vorthak collective mind experienced something like a system crash on a galactic scale. Bioships throughout the fleet began shutting down as their organic components refused to process any more contradictory data. Some ships turned on each other as conflicting instructions tore their programming apart. Warlord Krexthor felt his perfect collective consciousness collapse. For the first time in his existence, he was alone in his own mind. The shared thoughts of 1,000 bioships were gone. The accumulated knowledge of 300 conquered species was unreachable. He was just one being facing the chaos of individual thought. The massive flagship began to break apart as its organic systems failed. Without the collective consciousness to coordinate them, the bioship's living components started dying. Krexthor tried to restore order, but he had never learned to think as an individual. His mind, bred for collective thought, could not function alone. Admiral Carter watched from Luna Base as the Vorthak fleet destroyed itself. Bioships that had been perfectly coordinated were now ramming each other. Others simply stopped moving and began to decay. The greatest military force in galactic history was tearing itself apart from within. The few bioships that survived the collective collapse fled toward the edge of the system. But they were no longer the perfect predators that had terrorized the galaxy. They were confused, isolated creatures operating on instinct rather than intelligence. Human fighters easily hunted them down. In the aftermath, rescue teams searched for survivors from the infiltration mission. They found very few. Linda Torres and her team had died when the flagship exploded. Private Chris Evans was gone along with all the others who had chosen sacrifice over survival. But their deaths had saved not just Earth but the entire galaxy. Captain Jake Morrison stood in the ruins of the Vorthak flagship's bridge. The alien technology was breaking down without the collective consciousness to sustain it. Organic components were rotting. Mechanical systems were failing. The perfect fusion of life and machine was coming apart. They built their strength on unity, Jake said to Dr. Amy Rodriguez as she collected data from the wreckage. But unity became their weakness when they met something they could not understand. Amy nodded as she scanned the bioship's remains. They tried to process human emotion with logical minds. It was like trying to solve poetry with mathematics. The equation broke them. News of the victory spread across the galaxy within hours. The Vorthak Empire, unconquerable for 3 centuries, had been destroyed by a handful of humans telling bedtime stories. Species that had cowered in fear began to celebrate. Worlds that had been marked for conquest started planning their own chaotic defenses. The Galactic Council met in emergency session to address the new reality. Humanity was invited to join as a full member, but more importantly, other species began studying human tactics. They learned that sometimes the best strategy was no strategy at all. They discovered that emotional decisions could be more powerful than logical ones. Admiral Carter received reports from across the galaxy as the remaining Vorthak forces collapsed. Without their collective consciousness, the bioships were helpless. They could not adapt. They could not learn. They could not even coordinate basic functions. The predators that had hunted the galaxy for centuries had become confused prey. Earth became the center of a new kind of military thinking. Alien cadets came to study human chaos theory. They learned that unpredictability was a weapon more powerful than any technology. They discovered that refusing to make sense could be the most sensible choice of all. The galaxy had learned an important lesson. Logic and order were valuable tools, but sometimes the universe needed a little madness to keep it honest.